Hi, Alexia. Welcome to Views from Bridge. The Greater Hartford Association of Realtors Bridge Committee is our diversity, inclusion, and equity committee. It's where we strive to have a voice for the underrepresented and marginalized in our industry and our community. So it would only be fitting to have you join us today. Welcome. Alexia, let me say I have so enjoyed working with you as the staff executive of NAR's Fair Housing Policy Committee. It's been an amazing ride, and we have accomplished so much. I'm so proud. We'll get to committee matters in just a moment, but first, Alexia, could you tell us in a few minutes, could you tell us about who you are, your background, and how you got into fair housing?
Sure. Thank you, Shanyelle, and thank you for the Greater Hartford Association and your Bridge Committee for having me on. Shanyelle, it's just how I was raised. My grandfather, Ned Smokler, was a member of what we think was the first racially integrated law firm in the United States in my hometown of Detroit. That was in the 1930s. Papa Ned used to pose as a straw lessor for Black lawyers to help them get office space downtown when they were not allowed to sign a commercial lease because of their race. He also represented the labor movement and was very active in struggles representing working people. Later on, Papa Ned became a home builder, and I only learned about this part of his career recently, but after World War II, my grandpa built homes for returning Black GIs who were shut out of home ownership opportunities because of the redlining and racially restrictive covenants that were still in effect in the 1940s. So he built homes inside of Detroit for working class Black folks who were coming back from the war and couldn't realize the benefits associated with their GI Bill in most places. So I grew up with racial equity as a fundamental value that I learned from my family. I spent my first 10 years living in an integrated neighborhood in the city of Detroit. Then my family moved to the suburbs, to a mostly white suburb. And the other kids were absolutely shocked that someone like me, someone white, had lived on the other side of 8 Mile Road. They had grown up hearing a story about the city of Detroit from their parents, from the media, that did not square with my own experience. And it had a really strong effect on me at that young age that we had lived in these two different disconnected worlds, and that something about that really wasn't right. So after college, I worked for a civil rights champion from Detroit, Congressman John Conyers Jr. In law school, I focused on civil rights. And after law school, I got recruited into HUD's Office of Fair Housing by our NAR's own Brian Green. And when Brian came to the Realtors, he brought me with him. So that's my journey from Detroit to the National Association of Realtors.
Wow, what an amazing journey. And oh my goodness, your Papa Smokler?
Yes,
I
Ned
wish
Smokler.
We could have met Papa Smokler. That's just awesome. So this has been like ingrained in you as a child. That's
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Wow, you're so blessed to see both sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of fair housing activity at NAR's legislative meeting earlier this month. Can you tell us a little bit about the new fair housing policies that passed NAR's board of directors?
It was very exciting, Shanyelle, and you mentioned that you were proud, and I'm really proud too. It really feels like we're making a difference. So our Fair Housing Policy Committee passed a motion, a very simple, basic statement of support for fair lending and for the strong enforcement of the 2 federal laws that cover anti-discrimination in lending. That's the Fair Housing Act and another law called the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. NAR had made general statements in support of non-discrimination in lending, but never a strong and specific statement in support of these laws and their enforcement. So now that we have that NAR's board of directors has that statement on the books, this can really strengthen our advocacy in Washington when legislation comes up, when a federal agency is doing something around fair lending enforcement. We can step in and strongly say, yes, this aligns with our values, this is what we believe in, and we can bring our very powerful voice to the table. Then another 2 motions that our Fair Housing Policy Committee worked on together with the State and Local Issues Committee. One relates to fair housing training requirements for licensure. So as part of our ACT Fair Housing Initiative, which I'm going to talk about later, I think, our fair housing team conducted research on the licensing laws of all 50 states to look at both what are their fair housing training requirements and how do they enforce fair housing violations against the real estate license. And we found great variability among the states. So only half the states require fair housing training to get a real estate license, require a minimum concrete number of hours, which is our suggestion. You know, a lot of them folded into a general course on real estate law, where maybe they'll touch on it for 5 minutes. That's inadequate. We think there needs to be a dedicated concrete number of hours focused on fair housing. So only half the states require that right now to get a real estate license. Only a third of the states require it for CE, to renew your license. So the board of directors passed a motion urging the states to strengthen their licensure laws to require a minimum concrete number of hours of fair housing training, both to get a license and to maintain a license. The next piece of policy that we did in partnership with the State and Local Issues Committee, because NAR can't advocate on state issues, we can only urge our state associations to do so. So the next one had to do with heirs property. And Shanyelle, as you may know, many realtors have experienced this working with clients. Heirs property, or tenancy in common, is a form of ownership that can come up in a variety of situations, but the situation we're concerned about is when folks inherit property without a will. And when this happens over generations, ownership can be fragmented among dozens or even hundreds of heirs. And no one owns a specific piece or parcel, everyone just owns a fractional interest in the whole. And so the way the traditional, hundreds of year old law works is that any one of those heirs can force a partition if there's a disagreement over what to do with the land. And what we've seen happen is that in some of these situations, one of the heirs may have moved away, they don't really have any connection to the land anymore, and a speculator or developer will buy one tiny slice and then go to court to force a sheriff's auction, which forces the people who've actually been living on the land, in some cases for generations, it forces them off. It's done at a fire sale. There's no appraisal, there's no inspection, there's no financing. It has to be paid in cash. So the sale comes in at well below market value. People are forced off the land and they get paid much less than what the land is worth. So there's this uniform model law, which has now been passed in 20 states, which would offer some basic protections to owners of heirs property so that they would have right of first refusal before the land got sold out from under them. They would have notice, they would have an appraisal. If the land does have to be sold, it would be done not at a sheriff's auction, but through a real estate broker so they could get the fair market value of that land. So NAR has now passed policy saying, we urge our state associations to support this law. And that's a big deal, because when our lobbyists get involved, and there have been battles in some of these states over this reform, when our lobbyists get involved in state capitals, we can really make the difference and get this law passed. So those are the 3 pieces of policy just that NAR's board of directors passed just this month in May, and we're really excited about the progress we're making.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, those 3 initiatives are huge. and so impactful in our community, especially with fair housing and equity. So I am so glad that NAR has taken this up. And I just like to add, just seeing NAR has come so far, even in our fair housing policy initiatives. And you do have a powerful voice. And when you say you can't mandate states, you cannot. But when NAR speaks, trust me, the associations listen. So thank you so much. These are huge things. So we're really, really proud. And I want to just say, as the Bridge Committee of the Little Connecticut Greater Hartford Association of Realtors, whatever we can do to help you all, please let us know. I'm always here, and we have a whole crew behind us. So thank you so much. Alexia, as I mentioned before, you work on NAR's Act Fair Housing Initiative. Can you please explain to our audience what that is?
Yes, I would be happy to. So we launched this initiative shortly after the publication of the Newsday investigation in 2019. For those who haven't seen it, I highly recommend you search for Long Island Divided on Google and watch hidden camera videos showing real estate agents engaging in what appear to be blatant Fair Housing Act violations. Those videos made national news. They were cited in congressional testimony. In the state of New York, there were hearings in the state capitol. They passed all kinds of legislation. So we saw those videos and we knew that we needed to do a lot better. And so we launched this fair housing initiative called ACT. That's an acronym. It stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. It's a package of industry reforms and tools for our members, associations, and brokerages, shoring up our own house. So the most important pillar of ACT, the A, is accountability. So we have recently launched a self-testing program for brokerages who want to voluntarily test themselves for discrimination. So this would allow them to uncover and address problems and address them confidentially before a newspaper or a private fair housing group does. So we have a pilot going of that program right now. We've had a number of brokerages express interest in doing the self-testing and really finding out what's going on and doing something about it, getting out ahead of it. Also on the accountability front, as I mentioned, we reviewed those licensure laws of all 50 states. So we just took a crack at the education piece, but next we're looking at the enforcement part. How are real estate commissions dealing with fair housing violations of their licensees? What we've seen is that although many agents say, oh, I can't engage in discrimination, I could lose my license. In fact, that hardly ever happens. So we're looking at how can we improve the accountability for the real estate license when someone engages in a fair housing violation.
Excellent.
There's a couple more things under ACT, if it's okay for me to talk a little longer, Shanyelle. So the next two prongs of ACT, culture change and training, they kind of work together. So we've launched 2 new fair housing trainings that we hope will also help shift the culture of our industry. So one of these is Fair Haven, a fair housing simulation, which we launched at the end of 2020. And I was proud to be the project manager and subject matter expert for that training. This is really a new approach to fair housing training. There's nothing else like it. We decided to create it after Newsday. We saw in more than one of those videos, agents referencing their fair housing training. They actually talked about what they weren't supposed to do. They named it. They said, I'm not supposed to steer. And then they just went ahead and did it. So they knew what they weren't supposed to do. Something wasn't connecting. And so we saw that we needed a new kind of training, a deeper kind of training, something that would really resonate with people on a deeper, more emotional level. So Fair Haven does a couple of things. It's a simulation. You're in this fictional town. You're trying to sell houses against the clock. You're going to run into different situations where discrimination occurs, and you're going to have to make choices. And there are actually different paths you can take in Fair Haven depending on your choices. But then what's really special about Fair Haven is that sometimes we flip the script, and now you're actually a client and you're going through a situation where you're trying to buy a house and someone's discriminating against you. And you have to make, and it's a no-win situation. You're going through trying to make the choices, but you're not going to win. You're not going to get the house. And then at the end, we have video testimonials of real people who have experienced housing discrimination. And the idea here was to have an emotional reaction to really resonate on a deeper level so that people would really fully embrace what fair housing means, that it's not just a checklist, memorizing laws and provisions, but, this impacts real people's lives, and what you do here has a real difference. And the feedback we've gotten is that this has moved people to tears. It's made people angry. It's had people standing up and pledging they're going to do better. So we're really happy with how it turned out. I think about 35,000 members out of 1.5 million have done it so far. So we need to get a lot more members to do this training. Then just quickly, the other training that we just released is our implicit bias classroom training, which we call bias override. So implicit bias, that's the way our brains automatically and without our conscious awareness attribute stereotypes to people that we're not familiar with. We all do this. It's the way our brains work. It's just, it helps us get through our day quickly without really thinking about things, helps us make quick decisions. But it can be a problem because those quick categories that you're placing people in, if that's based on a stereotype and it's not true, you could be treating people unfairly. And by the way, you could be doing this even as you hold fairness as a cherished value. So that can lead you down the road to a fair housing violation. You're making assumptions about people that could lead you into steering. That could lead you into denying someone equal professional service. So we released a video on this in 2020, and now we have a classroom course that's ready for CE credit in your state if you apply and get it approved. It takes us deeper into first the history of bias and discrimination in real estate. We think it's so important for people to understand, how did our communities become so segregated? It wasn't just a natural consequence of people's individual choices. It was the result of policies and practices from the government and from industry that divided us. Then we look at the mind science of identity, really understanding how our brains work, why they do this. And then we specifically put it into the real estate context. How can these snap-second judgments and decisions lead you into a fair housing violation? And then the course takes you through some strategies and tactics to interrupt that stereotypical thinking. So you're seeing every person as an individual, not a stereotype, and you're treating them with equal professional service. So we're really proud of getting that training off the ground. We've trained 40 trainers. We're about to train 40 more. So that training is going to be out there in the world, and I'm really excited to see the reaction to it. Then just one last thing I'll mention under ACT is our Fair Housing Champion Award. So we just announced our first Fair Housing Champions this April in Fair Housing Month. This is to shift the culture of our industry to one that really celebrates and lifts up fair housing. This acknowledges people who go above and beyond, who are really working in their businesses and communities to expand homeownership opportunities and close homeownership gaps. All right, I'm going to shut up now.
No, Alexia, this is all so wonderful. Like, my mind is racing because there's so many things I want to have you further explore. But for the sake of time, I know we can't. So I really, really want to have you back. I really do, just to have you expound on those three initiatives that the whole thing that you're doing. I mean, everything is tying together and it's amazing. And even in Connecticut, we're doing some of the similar things because we saw the need, and I thank goodness for our Connecticut Association of Realtors, because they made an accountability task force, and they're addressing many of the same things that you're doing. And it's an accountability task force. That's the name of it, because we're holding ourselves accountable. So Fair Haven, all the things, it's all tying together. And we're just so glad that we are all in alignment together. So thank you so much, but we're definitely having you back. So lastly, if you could quickly tell us what's next. You did touch upon some things that you've just piloted, but what's next on the horizon for fair housing? What's your future big goal?
Well, there's so many things. My list is so long, and we're going to hire some more people, and you're going to see so much stuff. But let me just touch on two things. There's a policy motion that we're hoping we're going to move in November. This is around special purpose credit programs. So these are lending programs that are targeted to communities who have been historically shut out. These special purpose credit programs have been authorized in law for quite some time, but they haven't really been used very much. They've mainly just been used in the context of a fair lending lawsuit as part of a remedy when a lender has been found guilty of lending discrimination. Then they have to offer one of these programs. But the federal government now is really pushing more lenders to offer loan products that are targeted at marginalized and disenfranchised populations. And so we're going to be looking at a policy motion for November to support those. So we'll see, knock on wood. Then the other thing I wanted to tell you about is, you know, when we talk about fair housing, how can you live up to fair housing? You know, first do no harm, right? So you need to have a fair housing compliance program in place. You need to have your standardized procedures. You need to make sure you have all the guardrails in place so that implicit bias and other things aren't running you astray. But then beyond compliance, right? Compliance is the bare minimum. First, do no harm. But what can you do to go beyond compliance? And what I really want to do this summer is talk to some agents, brokers, and members who are working a lot with first generation buyers, you know, accessing things like down payment assistance, special purpose credit programs, learning more about these practices so that we can publish them more broadly and share them with other members, give them these tools so that they can maybe reach into a community that they haven't served before and touch clients that they haven't served before, and learn that, you know, if someone isn't ready today, you don't just say no and turn them away. You know, maybe you hook them up with a housing counselor and they'll be your client in a couple of years. So that's the sort of resources that we're looking to put out next.
Awesome, 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 awesome. I love it all. So, and it's going to be so impactful. So Alexia, I cannot tell you how we are so honored to have had you come today and speak with us. Your work is so needed and so appreciated. It's crystal clear to me that this is not just a staff position for you. This is your passion. Thank you, Papa Smokler. Thank you, because that's where it sounds like it started. So we're grateful to Papa Smokler too. Thank you so much for you continuing the fight for fair housing. We so appreciate it. I personally look forward to working with you more in the future. Alexia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shanyelle. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Views from Bridge. If you have any questions or suggestions or comments, please feel free to email us at gar@garonline.com. Thank you very much. My name is Shanyelle Young, and I appreciate it.